Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. Thank you, Igor, for invitation and for being so patient with all of us. And sorry, it's very strange because it's very close, Albania to Croatia. I would really love to come there and be in presence, but here university in Albania, in Elbasan, we are facing uh, a lot of administrative stuff with the students registering and etc., etc. But I hope that this online presentation would be interesting as in presence. And I promise not to take too much time because I know that we both of us we are between everybody and lunch. So I will start immediately. And my topic for one moment. Uh, it's okay for the screen sharing?
Yes. Yeah, we see perfectly.
Not here. Okay. One. Uh, my recent studies and research, I want to share with you that last year, 2 years ago, we started here in Elbasan a Jean Monnet Chair in European law. So I am now trying to study and to see on the focus of my studies shifted to transport in Albania, but also seen under the European law perspective. Because as maybe many of us knows, Albania is one of the candidate countries and lately has opened the negotiation processes with EU institutions for becoming a member of the European Union. And due to this fact, it always has affected from the beginning transport legislation. I want today to give an overview about all the fields of transport, so main fields of transport in Albania and how are they regulated. So I am trying to deal with the process of codification and how it affects transport and is heavily affected from codification transport, because I can say from now that we have three different codes of transports. A fourth, it's a road code, but only for security, only for police fines. But I want to start with the process of codification in Albania. We had two breaking points, as many of us knows. In the 90s, we came out from a communist regime, and during these changes of regime, we started producing legislation in order to be market-driven economy. So we started with an Albanian civil aviation with the law of 1994. We started on road transport of 1998. We had also, during communism, a code of rail transport of the Socialist Republic of Albania, which is I found, and I found it very interesting, but I'm not, let's say, fully dedicated to study on that part because we lacked on cases brought to court. And the second breaking point at this moment was the moment in which Albania, as a Balkan country, has posed its site into the European Union. And we say we share the same values, we share the same principles. So at this moment, we started our process. It was very long. It is very long process from 2003 for being part of the European Union. As now we are facing this situation in Albania, which other countries has faced it before, but I don't know at this point of my research how other countries dealt with it. But we are facing this problem that these two breaking points made Albania, put Albania in the situation that we didn't conserve our legal traditions too much, even in transport sector. So we have these laws of the 90s, but it happened even in other field of law. For example, in business law, we started with a law that was intended as a code of commercial companies and entrepreneurship. And then in 2008, we shifted in a law, in a German model, a law, not a code, of companies. But as regarding to transport, it's the same situation. We started with producing some laws that were needed in the 19th, and later we started in line with the consultancy of EU experts. We started producing these codes, and the integration process in Albania, the focal point for the process until now was the Stabilization Association Agreement in 2006. And we started creating the pieces of legislation in order to be in compliant with the adoption of the acquis communautaire in Albania. I can say that it's a very long process. It was a very long process. And it was, let's say, imprinted by the codification, at least in transport. But codification, none, in my opinion, as codification will be seen as an autonomous piece of law, but codification as a special law. Therefore, this special piece of law, of legislation regarding transport or maritime transport or other fields of transport, to be integrated with dynamic reviews to the general law, for example, civil code. And let's make an overview on different fields of transport law and how codification worked under the expertise of the EU officials and EU institutions, especially the Commission, EU Commission. We can say from now, another thing that I wanted to say, that under the IMO, Albania has tried to make the Maritime Code in 1994, so in the early 90s, but it came into light just in 2004, the Maritime Code of the Republic of Albania as amended, and we have in maritime field a main and crucial law which disposes on port authorities. But we have port authorities and the law of port authorities. It's not for all ports in Albania. It's only for Port of Durrës. So we have this kind of landlord port and other commercial port, Valona, Saranda, Shëngjin, etc. But only Port of Durrës is regulated by this law, and it has its own port authority. Regarding the rail transport, we had, as I said in the beginning, we had a rail transport code of Socialist Republic of Albania in 1988. We made a new code in order to be in line with the international agreements when we are part in rail transport in 2004. And now we came in 2016 in this new code of rail transport. And this code is a very well-made code. It has, especially for the privatistic part, so for private law, it has a good regulation of contract of transport by rail, but also make a lot of dynamic references to the civil code. So at this point, it's more specific or special than autonomous. But we face a problem here because it's foreseen in this code that we should build a regulatory authority, which should be independent, but we are now in 2022 and it's not yet built this authority. On the other hand, we lack of development on rail transport. Maybe this is more political and it's not the interest, but we see that in 2016 we had adopted a code in rail transport. When we came to air transport, we have the Air Code of the Republic of Albania of 2008, which was lately renewed in 2020. We had a new code, and in the road transport, we still have this law of 1998, which is heavily amended. Heavily amended, the last amendment was in 2014 and 2016, which we introduced several pieces of several different provisions within the law regarding the adoption or regarding the implementing European directives and European regulations in the field of road transport. Now, as I said, as I explained, in the whole panorama of transport law, maritime, rail, air, and road, our changes of legislations are driven only from one focal point. So the focal point is EU integration, and all the pieces of legislations are given or are consulted with EU experts, and we had, let's say, somehow lose a link with tradition in Albanian law. We have lose a link with reality at some point with the reality or economic development of sectors in Albania. And we have these pieces of legislations. So as you can see in the slide, I referred here only primary legislation, because we have, during this whole process of acquis adoption in Albania, we started the processes, we make the codes, we make the laws, as in case of road transport, but we are facing some problems in issuing secondary regulation in different fields. We have this process, which is very long, from 2006, I said, and in 2006, the bilateral agreement between Albania and the European Community in Article 59 states that Albania has the duty to make progressive harmonization of the Albanian transport legislation with that of the community, in terms then of safety, security, environmental standards. So the article is very, very, very long. And in this process, we see that we have adopted primary legislations under EU expertise, but when it comes to secondary legislations, in order to being fully implemented and fully adopted and fully aligned with the, let's say, with the acquis, we face some problems. The only field we are not facing a lot of problems is the air transport. And I want to make maybe a political consideration at this point. And in my modest opinion, is that in air transport, we have a real market with the EU. So the EU in this field pushes in order for Albania to adopt all the pieces of legislations. And so we have a real market with EU countries in air transport. But in the other field, we are going with a slow pace in order to fully implement our legislations, the acquis communautaire into our legislation. Now, this process of codification, as I said, is under a heavy EU influence. As a process as a whole, codification is very difficult because you have to set an organic piece of legislation, complete, with no lacunes and autonomous, preferably. Now, in Albania, we have 3 codes of transport, and what I am questioning and what I am, let's say, seeing in my research is it effective? It is always effective. Now, in my point of view, the choice of Albania to adopt the codes in the sector of transport It's mainly a request from the EU, because the EU wants that in the transport sector, when we have a lot of connections with the EU, which is a very important sector, the EU try to persuade Albania to adopt codes, because codes in Albanian legislations, in parliamentary legislations, are very difficult to be changed. We need a majority of 3/5 of the parliament. So I guess that's Albania adopting codes in transport in transport law. It's more driven from a practical point of view, from the, let's say, from the EU process, the process of integration in the EU, then the clear path of Albania in adopting codes of transport in order to have special legislation that regulates transport. So at this point, we have different other sectors, special sectors, that are not regulated by codification. As I said before, in business law, for example. But in transport, we face ourselves with 3 different codes of transports, which not going to unity. Rail is different. Rail transport has a code. Maritime transport, air transport has a different code. But at the end, they all has specific norms and specific provisions, which refers to our old, let's say old, because it's 1994, the civil code, to our old civil code of 1994. So the new codes are very good pieces of legislations regarding the regulation of transport sector, at least the public law. But when you go to see the private part of regulation, the private law, which are englobed in the specific codes, in my modest opinion, it lacks of good provisions, and provisions that are really well written, and are really trying to establish a good piece of legislation that will maintain a good piece of legislation, a secure piece of legislation for the years to come. We saw that with the air code, we saw that with the rail code, which in cadence of 10 years are changed and really fully modernized. And that's the main problem that I started to notice in Albanian legislation, because if you change primary legislation very often, and if you make a lot of changes calling them reform, then at the second point, the economic sector will suffer, because that will be a very problematic way of adopting secondary legislation, which now we are facing and will face in the future as well. I want to share in my last slide some concerns of mine regarding this way of adopting legislation in Albania, and it is clearly connected with the EU integration process. I analyzed the position of Council and Commission in a different point of Albania EU integration process from 2003 until 2021. And I analyzed the reports from 2029, 2020 and 2021 of the Commission, when I saw in different fields of legislation, even including transport, that we have a quite political evaluation of the progress made from Albania. So we started from some progress. Then in 2021, when Albania was granted the opening of negotiation, we see that significant progress was made in many areas, in some areas of legislation, including transport. It was a positive evaluation by the Commission, and now we are at the point that we have this process of the negotiation between EU and Albania. But yet my concern is that regarding specific fields of legislation, especially even in transport, we have adopted primary legislation, but we are lacking of adopting secondary legislation. And on the other hand, when we go to see into the practice, because lawyers practice law every day in courts, we have a quite problematic way of transposing secondary legislations of EU, especially directives, in Albanian legislations, because in some point, at some point, we have from the whole this process of, let's say, legiferation in Albania, we have lost a way on, let's say, adopting legislation, on issuing legislation that will be a very good piece of legislation and which will catch the needs of the market or the needs of the economy or the needs of the everyday courtroom. Now we are facing a new methodology of enlargement from the European Union. So the last country which entered was Croatia, by the way, and now we are facing this new methodology of enlargements, which will be adopted for the other Western Balkan countries. And I raise a lot of concerns on how we will implement secondary legislations, and because in this new methodology, the acquis adoption, it's one of the most important pieces of the progress made. So at this point of view, I hope that we can make a substantial correct adoption of the acquis in Albanian legislation, and hope that these codes of transport in Albania are not anymore to change, but we should complete the legislation in a certain field, in a specific field, with the issuing the secondary legislation as well. Now, I will go to the conclusions because I promise that I will not be too long, but I think that I have spoken for a while. And I have reached at the state of art of my research to some conclusions that as a legal system with only 30 years as a, let's say, modern legal system, we are an ongoing process to fully implement codes regarding transport, because we had a parenthesis of 50 years of communism. We have separate codes in the fields of transport, which are which have a character of specialty more than autonomy. We have made a clear choice in order to improve our legislations, which is adopting acquis communautaire, and we can find the reason of codification in the commitments taken from Albania in the process started in 2006, and we are not yet sure when it will be concluded and will be part of the European Union. The final issue and the final conclusion of why the Albanian legislator has adopted the code is that the code offers legal certainty and better regulation on a sector like transport, which is driven from, let's say, issues of security and safety. And adopting codes was made only for this specific reason, and doesn't have any other reason of adopting codes, because as I told that in other fields of law we don't have many codes. But the only importance of having codes is that in the specific sectors like transport, we are very in advance with the process of EU integration. And it's the need that EU has to have a clear, let's say, safety and security legislation in Albania that make us producing these pieces of legislation. And thank you for your kind attention. I hope that I wasn't too long. And I really am glad and thanks to Igor for his patience and for his kindness.